Story 1. The events of this story revolve around a young man named Kamil, who is 26 years old. Kamil has a younger brother named Maher, who is 10 years old. Kamil lives in his own apartment, away from his parents due to his work conditions. In fact, this is not the only reason that made Kamil. He lives alone, but there is another reason. Kamil's parents are always in a state of quarrel. Although this quarrel does not last long, he decided to move away and live alone. During the previous period, tension increased in Kamil's parents' house, which made Kamil take his younger brother Maher to live. With him, Maher stayed with Kamil for a long time, and Maher felt that his life with his brother would be better for him. Kamil returned to his home and was feeling very tired. Kamil opened the door to the apartment and noticed something suspicious. All the lights in the apartment were off, as if the house was empty and no one was in it. Kamil ran quickly looking for his brother. Kamil found his brother in his room where he was listening to music. Kamil said, "Are you okay, brother? Where's the babysitter? Why are all the lights off?" Maher said, "I had been sitting in my room all day and the babysitter was checking on me every hour and was bringing me fresh juice. But for about 3 hours I had not heard from her." Maher continued his speech. "I decided to go to the hall to see her, but I did not find her, as if she had disappeared. So I decided to return to my room, especially since your return date is approaching." Kamil felt very angry and called that office and told him what had happened. The office apologized profusely for what had happened and returned Kamil's money. After that, Kamil prepared some food for him and Maher. Kamil ate the food with his brother, and Maher went to sleep. Kamil was feeling sleepy, but there was something required of him at night: work. So Kamil decided to work a little before going to sleep. While Kamil was working, he heard his brother's voice calling for him. Kamil went to his brother to see what was wrong with him. Maher said, "I heard a voice in your room. Perhaps it was a thief." Kamil felt afraid for his brother, so he decided to take his brother and go. To the car below, Kamil called the police. While Kamil was talking to the policeman on the phone, he saw the babysitter leaving the house. The babysitter got into a car and rushed to escape. The policeman arrived and Kamil told them everything. The policeman went to the babysitter's house where they were able to obtain the address from the office that sent it to Kamil. Kamil eventually discovered that the babysitter was suffering from a psychological illness and that she was planning to make Kamil sleep, he and his brother, and then she will kill them and steal all the contents of this house and escape. But unfortunately for Kamil, the office soon hired this girl, whose features seemed kind and innocent. In the end, Kamil thanked the police very much, and thanked God that he or his brother were not exposed to any harm, and Kamil then decided taking his brother with him to his workplace when he goes there. Our story today is about a German family living in the state of Bavaria. This family was investigated for a crime that happened to them for a period that no one could ever imagine. The family's murder was investigated for 85 years. It may seem strange to some, and there are those who did not believe that this case was investigated for all that time. The investigation began in 1922 AD and ended in 2007 AD. The crime occurred specifically in March, specifically on the 31st. The family that was exposed to this tragedy is the Gruber family, along with the maid who worked in the house. The number of family members was 5 and they were all killed, along with the maid. 6 months before the crime, everything began. There was a maid working in the family's house. This maid used to hear strange sounds around the house. She used to hear the sound of knocking on the windows of the house, and sometimes she would hear whispering sounds in the corridors and other sounds that made whoever heard them feel very afraid. The maid did not hesitate to tell the family members what she heard, but the family members did not believe the maid and told her that all of this was nothing but hallucinations. The maid was sure that she heard these sounds, and for this reason she could no longer continue working and decided to leave work. And this is what happened. Indeed, the situation remained the same until one day before the crime, when the family decided to bring in a new maid. On the same day that the new maid arrived, the family began to hear the same sounds that the previous maid had told them about. Not only that, but the family noticed some strange and suspicious things that began to happen in the house, without knowing why such things happened. For example, the father found a newspaper on the floor that he or any of the family members had not bought before, in addition to the disappearance of the keys to the storeroom that contained the equipment that the family members used constantly. All of these things may have been normal, but one day something suspicious happened. The weather was very cold and the snow was falling heavily. One of the family members noticed strange traces on the snow. These traces were coming from the forest and reaching the house, not only to the house, but to the inside of the house specifically. Not only is this terrifying, but what is terrifying is that these traces are traces of a creature or a person who entered the house but did not come out. The traces show that this thing is still inside the house. Terror began to creep into the family's hearts, and they remembered well the words of the previous maid. The father, whose name was Andreas, went to his neighbor and told him what had happened, and even told him about the previous maid's words. The neighbor told him that he had to arm himself in case of any emergency. But Andreas refused. On the specified day, which is the day when all the family members were killed, the crime took place. There was indeed a killer who had sneaked into the house. On that day, the killer took the family members one by one to the barn to kill them. 4 members of the family were killed and placed in the barn. As for the 5th member, she was the little girl. The killer killed her and the new maid in the house. The strange thing is that the killer did not kill the family and escape. Rather, the killer remained in the house for several days after committing the murder. The crime was not discovered until 5 days after it was committed. The reason is that no one noticed anything suspicious around the house. There was smoke coming out of the fireplace and the barn was full of food for the animals and everything seemed normal. All of this was the reason for not discovering the crime. On the 5th day of committing the crime, there was a worker who had agreed with the family members to come and fix one of the agricultural machines. Indeed, that worker came and started knocking on the door, but no one answered him. The worker decided to fix the machine because it was outside the house. After the worker finished fixing the machine, he noticed something suspicious, which was the presence of a dog tied to the door of the house. This dog was not there. Here, the worker confirmed that the family was inside the house. The worker did not have much time, so he decided to go to the family's neighbor, who was Lawrence. The worker told Lawrence what had happened. Lawrence decided to go check on the family, especially since he hadn't seen any of them for nearly 5 days. Lawrence arrived at the house but didn't find anything inside. He went to the barn and found the family members killed. Lawrence immediately informed the police, who came and began their investigation. You may not have believed that the first suspect was Lawrence himself, because he was the closest to the family. Not only that, but because Lawrence wanted to marry the family's daughter, but the father, Andreas, refused. The investigation, which proved Lawrence's innocence, continued for a long time, but in the end, nothing was reached, and the case ended in 2007.